Okay, hello and welcome to this question time where we will be discussing in some detail the issues surrounding tuition fees, climate change and Brexit. We have some questions lined up, so yeah, let's get the ball rolling.
Can I ask you some questions about climate change? Okay, what do you think of Dr. Martens' response to the climate strike last month?
Okay, I'll turn to Jack to...
Well, what I think the point of the march was to show that you want to go against the establishment, and it's kind of hard to go against the establishment if the establishment are telling you to do it. And also there are several rules he has to put in place because there would be no teachers there. If something happened to him, the school, if it happened to someone who went there, the school would be liable. So I think what he did was what he had to do. We don't necessarily agree with it, but under law, that is what he had to do, and I can't criticise him for it. We had slightly different arrangements in the sixth form because we're already allowed to go outside, which I think is a good thing. We were told, you can go if you want, we accept this. None of us, I went on the march, as did Charlie. Neither of us were punished in any way, shape or form. So I think that for the lower school he did what was right, and then for the sixth form he did what was right.
Okay, on the note of Charlie, I'll pass it to you.
Yep. Yeah, I mostly agree with Jack that the teachers had the right to do that. I mean, it's up to the students, obviously, to decide whether they want to join the march or not, but I think in principle most teachers agreed with the morals of the strike, but obviously in practice they couldn't actually legally endorse it because that would make them legally responsible for students. And in an organised march that's not organised by professionals, it was more of a student organisation. There's a number of things that could happen that could put the school in any sort of position, so I think it was a right stance to have.
Okay, thank you. Can we take another question, please?
On the subject of uni fees, student loans currently have like an APR rate of 18.3. What do you think about that? Should it be higher or lower?
Okay, I'll pass on to you.
Well, I think first we need a bit of context about what student loans are and why we have them. The reason we have to pay so much to go to university is because we have so many people going to university. Currently we have approximately 50% of 18-year-olds leaving and going to university, and that's a disproportionately high number compared to how many people do degrees that are going to benefit them later in life. So I think the problem we have there isn't so much the actual rate of the amount we have to pay back in debt, but the amount of people we have going to do Mickey Mouse degrees and degrees that aren't going to benefit them. So I think the way to solve that problem is actually to focus on vocational courses, technical courses, and more relevant courses to people who don't need such academic professionalism in their life. Does that answer your question?
In universities, certain applications that just simply don't need to be there because you can actually take apprenticeships with the same kind of degrees. And it's just, putting too much pressure on that one market, therefore increasing the price. For example, if universities could just, put their resources more towards, say, scientific, mathematical, things that need genuine university kind of education, you would find cheaper university fees because they have more resources with the current provided funding that they get. So I don't think that the solution would be anything other than what James was really talking about there as well. I completely agree.
Yeah, just one thing on that. I think definitely the rate is too high for students, but I think generally the tuition fees are too high. Obviously there is a price that comes with the university degree because of the chances it gives you in the job market above people who get apprenticeships or don't go to go through further education. But there should still be a level of fees that apply just for people to sort of experience their first responsibilities monetarily. I think people have a problem with paying back loans because in school and education now we're not taught about finance. There's no PHSE lessons that explain to students what loans are, how your taxes work, that kind of thing. So I think it's an opportunity for students to understand how you pay back loans and how that works, essentially, to give you a bit of life experience before you get to the real life stage.
Well, James gave us some context, but let's look at the wider context here. So, if we look at European countries, Austria, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Norway, Poland and Sweden all have free tuition. And James has said that it's the reason we have too many people going to uni. But however, looking at these countries, we have about 50% of people going to uni, and as James said, and of 25 to 34-year-olds, 49% have a uni degree. However, in the countries that do have free uni tuition, Norway has 49%, so exactly the same as us. Sweden has 46, around the same. And Ireland even has more than us. It has 51% of 25 to 34-year-olds with degrees. So to use that as a reason to have such high tuition fees, we have the highest tuition fees in Europe, is wrong. However, having said that, I do agree that we need a lot more funding in terms of people who go on to apprenticeships and vocational courses. What we have now is a culture where you seem to have failed if you're not going to uni. If you decide not to go to uni and go straight into the world of work, people think you're not as clever, you haven't worked as hard at school, and that's wrong. That's what we really have to change. The government spent nearly £6 billion on unis last year. If we could put so much of that money back into things like apprenticeships, getting people into helping them to become electricians, nurses, builders. That's what we really need in this country. Those, low-income jobs, but that are still skilled. That's what we really need. And so I think there should be more focus on that. And I would rather the government putting more money into those things and keeping tuition fees high for now, than just abolishing tuition fees to make it look like they're doing stuff for students and doing stuff for young people, because that's not what we really need.
I just want to add a little thing to that. I totally agree with Jack's view that this appalling snobbish view we have of people doing technical degrees and vocational courses really needs to change urgently. We've become terribly snobbish, and it's harming our economy and it's harming our population. So I totally agree on that point. But I do feel the need to mention that some of the examples you gave earlier of countries that have high university rates but still free tuition fees. I mean, for example, the Scandinavian countries have a totally different economy. It's really not fair to compare their countries to ours directly like that. And another one you mentioned was Germany. They have grammar schools, essentially. They call them gymnasiums, and they have more technical schools as well. So right from an early age, they are differentiating their pupils to go and take the most appropriate life course. They make sure they take the most appropriate courses to suit their profession later in life. So they're very efficient, and they make sure that their Germans get into the right schools for their right jobs, and they have a far more prosperous economy. And I think that's a point that maybe could be mentioned, that they don't do everything, they do what's necessary and what benefits the economy. It's an economy-based education system.
Yeah, I think we've talked about the cost of it, but I think what teachers get in the end is a very poor wage for the amount of work they put in. I mean, public sector workers have only seen a 1% pay rise in the last few years, and it's disgusting that the amount of inequality can be shown between teachers, an average teacher's wages, and that of a university director that receives upwards of $500,000 for the most prestigious universities every year. Teachers deserve a lot higher wage for the job they do and for the services they provide to the future of our country. So I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed, obviously by the government fiscally, but I think there needs to be some sort of regulation put in there that universities can't just make this obscene payment to people in such high positions that for what they get paid don't actually return that in the value they give their universities.
Could I quickly ask, and possibly play devil's advocate here, surely teachers are aware of approximately the wage they would receive when they're entering the world of teaching. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, but I don't think that... I'll turn it off. Oh, no, sorry. But I don't think that stops them from asking for a wage rise or, striking for a wage rise. I think teachers deserve a wage they can live on and be comfortable in for the necessary work they do.
Amid growing intimidation and abuse, many MPs have grown to panic buttons, which can cost up to £1,000 a year. What do you think of the statement?
Yeah, I also saw Angela Rayner, who's I'm thinking talking about, is the Shadow Education Secretary for Labour, who talked about panic buttons, and it is a problem, I think, across the Western world of people becoming more aggressive towards politicians. This rise of populism is a massive problem, and there needs to be more done. These so-called yellow vests in London who spat Anna Soubry, the famous Remainer who's now part of the independent group, and called her a Nazi. It's disgusting what they're doing, and it is shameful that we've come to this point in our society, in our politics. I think one of the main things that has happened to make this sort of atmosphere is the use of language within politics. People calling other politicians traitors, for example. This is the sort of thing that riles people up and gets them into such a state where now politicians need panic buttons. And this isn't just a problem on the right. This is just as much a problem on the left. The Young Labour Twitter account, after the independent group formed, tweeted something, I think it was along the lines of, it was a line from the Labour anthem, The Red Flag, where it was like, while traitors sneer and cowards cheer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. And that just shows that these people in the independent group, they're not traitors, they're doing what's right, what they believe is right at least. And
I just don't know how much I have to add to this topic. I'm a bit concerned we need a panic button. I think that might be symptomatic of our very easily offended snowflake society, potentially. If there's violence involved, sure, you call the police. A panic button, if that's a measure to call the police, I'm welcome for it. But I do think we have a very soft and easily offended society. Sure, politics has become increasingly aggressive, and we need to do our best to tame that down, but by just being easily offended by everything, you don't help the problem. You don't decrease the violence, you don't decrease the aggressiveness. I think we need to be a bit more resilient and a bit more careful about what we say. I think it just comes down to a bit of social responsibility.
Totally. Well, I'm deeply offended about what James has just said. No, on a serious note, yeah, it's quite true. We do live in a society right now where people do take things too hard too often. But at the same time, I do believe that we don't need to have such a toxic community in our politics right now. I don't think the solution, again, is something like a panic button or so on. But just simply, I think we just need to bring back a little bit more of etiquette into our politics. And that's just a simple message.
Oh, back to me, okay. I think the statement that society is more snowflakey now is a little bit out there. I think the extremes of it, there are people on both sides who take it too far, and there are people who get offended by things that really aren't offendable in most cases. But I think, yeah, just the statement for the majority of society isn't very true.
Okay, can we have another question, please?
Recently, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, sorry, Ruth Hack, an MP for Ealing Central and Acton in Labour, was a target of a racist email over Brexit suggesting she return to Bangladesh or risk her life. What's your opinion on this and violence to the party?
it is a very, very similar question to the one we just got, and I wanted to add that... That is working, sorry. An MP died just over 2 years ago. Jo Cox was murdered while she was out on the street campaigning. So when people get emails like this, you know, threatening them, then I can completely understand why every single politician is taking this so seriously. And the biggest problem here is how we can make these people who are sending these sort of emails, how we can rationalise them and stop these sort of people doing this in the first place. And I think it does come back to the rhetoric that the media use, that politicians use. You know, it's just like the Daily Mail headline when the judges ruled that Parliament had to vote for Article 50. The headline was "Enemies of the People." This isn't the sort of language we want to use in a civilised debate, and that's the sort of thing that rolls up people with mental health issues and causes very vulnerable people to go out on the attack when they feel the elite is out to go against them. So I think it very much comes down to it's a responsibility of the media and politicians to make sure they don't encourage this sort of behaviour.
I don't have much to add there. I think Jack very concisely summed up the attitude we need to have and the changes that need to come into place. These people are disgusting, but I think he's right in saying that these are the anomalies. These are the people with potentially mental health issues, people that get come to extreme conclusions without the provocation you would expect. And I think the measures Jack mentioned would be sensible in reducing these terrible freak occurrences.
I would say they're much more than an anomaly. I think if you look at the amount of racist abuse Diane Abbott has received throughout her career, it's evidence of sort of the toxic society that does exist for people who feel like threatening an MP with violence and death is the right way to go about politics. I mean, people should be able to voice their opinion, but not in the way that you can contact an MP and strike fear into them to change their opinion. I think Brexit is a divisive issue, but it shouldn't bring the country to butt heads basically and resort to violence on that occasion.
I don't fundamentally agree with that, to be honest, because at the end of the day, these politicians have signed up to become politicians. This is a kind of situation that they're put in because of their careers, and it's classically been quite easy to hate on politicians. I think it's not so much that, you know, it's just racist abuse or something like that, and I do agree as well that the majority of this abuse is either a person not quite thinking about what they're doing, or either, you know, having a bit of an anomalous action here. Because, simply put, politicians will always be hated, and I mean, that's just how it's going to go down, because people will always disagree with what's going on, whether it's Brexit, whether it's something like tuition fees that are going on. We're going to go on to climate change. There'll always be people who disagree in some manner, and there will always be toxicity in our society, and politicians will simply have to deal with this at a certain point in their career. Yeah.
Just one thing, I don't think Jo Cox signed up to get killed for doing her job. I think it's to brush aside it as an anomaly is very scary, because then it normalises it when it happens, just to say, oh, it's just one of those slight occurrences. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do in a society where we have those occurrences. That Jeremy Corbyn was struck, although it might seem comical, with an egg. It was a punch to the head that could have been a weapon, and we could have seen the leader of the opposition could have been killed for his political views. And I think that's very dangerous in the kind of society we have today.
Okay, I'd just like to revert back to questions on climate change very quickly. Has anyone got anything to say on that front?
Do you believe that we should declare climate emergency or a climate crisis?
Okay, James?
Quite simply, I would say at this point in time, no. I don't think it's the most pressing issue we have as a country. As a world, an international community, it's a different issue altogether. And I think the best way to combat the terrible effects of climate change is for international collaboration, because one country on its own, you might say, well, it's a sign of change, it's going to be the starter that leads the pack. It doesn't quite work like that. You need international collaboration, and one country declaring an emergency isn't going to solve the problem.
And we do need global cooperation, because one country declaring a climate emergency, which there is, I'm not going to disagree with that at all, won't make the difference we need to save our planet. And that's why it's such a shame that we're leaving things like the EU, which are perfect areas to cooperate, where you need those shared rules and regulations to enforce these sort of economic and environmental laws that we need to stop the climate from deteriorating even more. And in the UK, 40,000 people a year have premature deaths from pollution. North Street is the 7th most polluted street in the UK. It's ridiculous. We need to fundamentally change how we think, especially about transport. We need more public transport. We need more buses. We need to get people out of cars and into public transport. That's the thing that I think will really change it. I do agree we need to declare a climate emergency. We have 12 years to save our planet, and at the moment we're just not doing enough.
Okay, Charlie and Tony, about 30 seconds each.
Yeah, I think the rational response is very wrong. I think you should be scared. There are 12 years left to sort this out before we see irreversible changes. I think Greta Thunberg was right in saying the house is on fire, and in 12 years it will start burning down, and we will have no world left for our children and for the generations to come. I think it is a national and an international operation that needs to be begun. I think there does need to be an emergency declaration started right now, and we need to start taking radical action to reverse this irreversible change if we don't meet our targets and exceed them.
I agree. But on a short note as well, I think we shouldn't just point at politicians and states and say it's always a state's issue. I think we should also, on an individual level, take it as our own personal responsibility to make sure that every step of our lives that we can to protect future generations, that we are environmentally friendly, that we are taking care of the environment. We're also looking after, like, say, eco-friendly sources of energy. Perhaps instead of maybe taking the car to school, maybe walking or biking. It's a simple message, but at the end of the day, it could work. And not only that, but it actually puts you as a point of puts you in a point of responsibility for the actions that are going to be happening, which I think is great.
Okay, thank you very much.